Hello, my name is David Merlin. I want to wish you a happy Halloween or happy Samhain in Old Gaelic, which means summer's in. To start off, though, I want to see if we can help you with my enchanted hat to somehow look into the future and answer the most probing question that you could have about your life that you could find no answer for it. And now the hat's going to answer that for you. So I want you to think about the most complex, probing question that you have, the most profound question you have about your life, and think about it for a moment. Okay, ready? Now the hat's going to give you the answer to your question about life. Here it is.
No, there's no such thing as magic. Wherever would you get such a foolish idea?
Well, I guess we're done here. Okay, well, thank you for coming. No, actually, we're going to do some more talking about Samhain, about Halloween. It's a time of year when the veils or the boundaries between our world and the world of the fairy, the world of ghosts, the spirit world, is quite thin. This veil is so thin, in fact, that it's almost non-existent. It's in tatters, it's in shreds. It's not there. So, because of that, the fair folk and the ghosts could cross into our realm quite easily, and sometimes we could cross into their realm too. Which this is why some people have ghostly encounters sometimes this time of year, or meet up with fair folk. It's also the time that our ancestors would gather in or bring in the last of the harvest from the fields, from the gardens, and they'd bring it in, and anything left in the fields or in the gardens after Halloween was considered a gift for the fairies and would not be touched. It is also a time of year when the dark half of the year began. It's a time when the woman of the house or the mother of the house would put out the hearth fire. Now this hearth fire had been burning 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, every day, until this night when the mother of the house puts out the fire, and the house, the cottage, is bathed in total darkness, and the family goes out into the darkness, sometimes, depending if there's any starlight or not, perhaps total darkness, with others of their community walking together through the fields, through the woods, to a special sacred place where they would have a ceremony. And in the darkness, as they all walk together, they might feel someone tugging on their cloak, or someone touched their hair, and maybe it was the wind, or maybe it was a spirit of a loved one who had gone on before them in the spirit world. Or perhaps it was a fairy. Perhaps it was a cat, like Nimue, our little cat here. And they would go to this sacred place, this meeting place, the community, in the darkness, and they would wait, wondering if there was ever going to be light again in the darkness around them. And then suddenly, boom, a whoosh, a great ball of fire would leap up, and a great bonfire would come to life, a great blazing light. And they would get brands and light them, and run back to their house and relight their hearth fire. And as a symbol for this, that the sun, as a sign that the sun was going to return again, and in the darkness, the sun was going to return in a time of light, which would begin at the time of Yule. Samhain, or Halloween, is also a time to tell ghost stories. And, well, I grew up in a haunted house and had a lot of ghost experiences. Lots of moaning and wailing in my house. Shuffling sounds. I've seen spirits walk right up to my bed and try to talk to me, which is pretty frightening for a young boy. I remember once a frightening episode when I woke up. Actually, let me explain first. My room was in the basement, and very little light would come into the small, narrow windows in my room. And sometimes, if I was lucky, a little bit of moonlight would come in, and I'd be able to see a little bit into my room around my bed. On this one night, I think there was some moonlight spilling into the windows, and I was laying in bed, and my bed's pushed against the left side of the wall, and so I'd get in from the right side. So I was basically, if anything came to me on the right side, I was trapped, and I couldn't get out of the bed, which happened, I woke up from a dream. I know I was awake because I was wide awake, looking around my room, and I felt something crawling on my bedspread that was laid across my chest. And I looked down, and there was this woman's hand positioned on my bedspread across my chest. And it was a really strange looking arm. It was like really long and strange looking. And I saw the elbow on top of my bed. And the way it was laying there didn't make any sense. But it had long, long fingers and long, long nails. And it was a woman's hand. I could tell that, even though I had faint hair on the arm. I could tell it was a woman's hand. And it was laying across my bedspread, across my chest. And I tried to pull my covers up over my head. And when I did that, my motion of me doing that set the hand to moving across my chest, and it dragged across the bedspread, and I could hear the nails rasping against the bedspread as it moved across my chest. And then it fell off the side of the bed and hit the floor. I could actually hear it hit the floor, and it went thump, thump, like it hit the floor twice. And there was this inner urge, like this inner voice was telling me to look over the side of the bed and see where the hand went to. Of course I didn't. I just stayed pressed against the left side of the wall because I couldn't get out of the bed because the hand was on the right side. So I stayed that way until, wide awake, until the sun began to appear to peek through the windows of my bedroom. So that's my personal ghost story, one of many. But there's another ghost story. It's about a young man who a few years ago lost his job, couldn't pay his bills. He had a young wife and a small child, or 2 children in fact, and it was painful for him not to be able to provide for his family. He'd get the odd jobs now and then, but this wasn't enough to keep food on the table or help pay the bills. And they lived in a small cottage by the mercy of their landlord, who didn't worry about getting paid all the time. But the young man was quite ashamed of himself, so the way to soothe his pain, he went out drinking a lot with his friends at the pub with what little money he had, and spending what money they had to buy drinks for himself and sometimes for his friends. And one night he went there, and he was pretty broke, but he went to the pub, walked in, and the pub was empty except for the barkeeper and this one guy sitting at a table by himself. So this young man walks up to the guy sitting at the table and says, "Can I join you?" And this stranger says, "Of course you can. Sit down and join me. In fact, I'll buy you drinks all night long if you promise to help me with a job after we're done drinking." Well, that sounded too good to be true to the young man, so he said, "Sure, why not?" So him and this fellow drank all night long, and the stranger at the table kept buying the drinks. And the young man got rather drunk, tipsy. And by the end of the night, when the bar was about to close, the stranger at the table says, "Well, now it's time to do your job. You promised to help me with my job, and so come along." So the young man, he was quite agreeable. He was drunk and happy and cheerful, and he said, "Sure, of course I will. I keep my promises." So they went outside the pub, and right there on the sidewalk, right in front of the pub, was a coffin. And the young man looks at the coffin, looks at his new friend, the stranger, and he goes, "What's this coffin doing here?" He goes, "Well, that's the job. You're supposed to help me carry this coffin to the nearest graveyard." And the young man says, "Well, I don't know. It's getting late. I'll have to go home." He goes, and the stranger says, "You promised you'd help me with my job, and this is my job, to carry this coffin to the nearest graveyard." So the young man agrees finally. "Okay, I'll help you. I'll fulfill my side of the bargain." So the stranger gets one end of the coffin, the young man gets the other end of the coffin, and they walk through the dark night, down the dark trail, through the dark woods, to the graveyard. And they come to the graveyard, go through the graveyard gates, and here's this freshly dug grave right there, or behind some old gravestones. And the young man is now really getting terrified, and he goes, "What's going to happen now?" And the stranger says, "Help me lower the coffin into the grave." So basically both men got on either end of the coffin and pretty much dropped the coffin into the grave, and it landed right side up. And then the coffin lid open and it was empty. And the stranger says, "Well, thank you for helping me fulfill my job. Now I have to go to bed. It's time for me to go to sleep." And the stranger climbs into the grave, lays down in the coffin, the lid shuts tight. And the grave fills itself up. The dirt just starts filling stuff up there and fills the grave so it's covered over. But the young man runs as fast as he can back to his wife and his children, and he's shaken up. But after a few days of being completely terrorized and frightened, he began to realize that maybe this was someone trying to tell him to stop his drinking and to behave himself. So he stopped drinking, found a job, and lived happily ever after with his wife and children, and never visited that pub again. He stayed away from that pub for the rest of his life. And that's the story of the young man and the stranger in the coffin. One more story. There was once this madman who lived inside of a graveyard, a different graveyard. And he was this madman had spent many years being plagued by evil spirits that drove him so insane that he was driven out of the village into the graveyard years before. The villagers tried to control this young man who was a madman, tried to control him by chaining him up, wrapping chains around him, but he'd always break them and break free. And he ripped all of his clothes off, and so here's this naked madman living in the graveyard, which is rather frightening if you think about it. And he was like that for many years. The villagers just stayed away from the madman in the graveyard. And evil spirits night and day bothered this poor man, drove him insane, totally crazy. One day, in the middle of the day, he saw a group of men approaching the graveyard, and he was going to shout at them and scream at them and chase them off from his graveyard. But he noticed that in the center of this group of men was a young man who shined brighter than anybody he'd ever seen in his life. This young man, he shined like the sun. And the young man walks up to the madman and he says, "What is your name?" The madman screams at him, "Leave me alone, Son of God. Why do you come to plague me, Jesus? It's not my time yet." And Jesus says, "What is your name?" And the evil spirits plaguing the madman said, "We are the legion. We are many. We are the mob." And Jesus says, "Leave him alone. Come out of him and leave him alone." And the evil spirits begged Jesus, "Please, let us go in that herd of pigs over there by the cliffs, and we'll leave the man alone forever. Just let us go in that herd of pigs." So Jesus says, "Go into the herd of pigs." And the evil spirits did. And the pigs became so enraged and so frightened that they ran off, tumbled off the side of the cliffs into the ocean below. But the madman was no longer mad, but a sane man, a healed man. The villagers came out and found this once madman fully dressed and calm and rational sitting at the feet of Jesus, and they were full of awe. They were just amazed at the transformation, at the healing this young man had gone through. I guess, to me, this story means that in the dark night of our soul, in the darkness of our lives, even when we're being plagued by evil spirits, or so many things are just trouble in our lives, so many sorrows, that God is there with us, waiting to help us. And if we just let Him in, and let Jesus into our lives, there's light in the darkness. As I said earlier, excuse me, bring you back in my lap. Samhain, Halloween, is a time of transformation, of good magic, a time of shape-shifting. So perhaps if we wore costumes depicting of what we want to be, or who we wish we were, or who we are inside, maybe we dress up like a wizard, or perhaps a witch, or perhaps anybody, dress up in any costume you want that somehow tells people or says or helps bring out that inner self, that inner you that's trapped inside of you. So the costume can explain or says to the world, "This is who I am." And maybe Halloween will help you with good magic, transform your life, and help you become the person you were meant to be, the person that's deep inside of you, trapped inside of you, will be set free on this night of Halloween, this most magical time of the year. Well, thank you for listening to me and watching this video. And I, David Merlin, and Nimue, the talkative Halloween cat, wishes you all a happy Halloween, happy Samhain.